Nicole Jones. I am from Kantar. I was a little disappointed by those results from the survey. So we'll be covering content and context today, but I was really hoping to see that emotion sort of up a little bit higher, and we'll talk about why that is such an important sort of piece. So today I'm going to be talking about what advertisers must do right now to make sure you're connecting with the Aussie consumer. So as we had mentioned, so a lot of the data today comes from our media reactions thought leadership, which we ran earlier this year. So media reactions is the first global equity evaluation looking at both media channels as well as media brands amongst consumers and marketers. So let's get started. I know there's quite a bit of data on the slide, so I really want you to focus on the bottom portion of the slide. What we're seeing is Australia's not seeing the same growth in consumer advertising equity. And when we talk about consumer advertising equity, what we really mean is how receptive consumers are to advertising. And this is mostly coming from those digital formats. So when we look at those advertising attitudes, we see that they're slightly muted compared to global. Well, gray's a little bit not as strong on this side, but we could see that they are definitely sort of muted. And these muted attitudes are coming from online formats. So this is where we need to make sure that we're focusing our attention to ensure that these formats are not as intrusive or repetitive. And related to repetitive, I know that there was a lot of talk earlier this year in terms of frequency capping for BVOD, so definitely something to be mindful of. So this receptivity and sentiment is so important because we see digital media spend is increasing this year. And it's expected to increase next year as well. And that's quickly approaching us. Now, we're going to take a step back. So as I talked about, we are going to talk about sort of that content. And we did see, Australia's not seeing the same growth in that advertising equity. And so it's really important that we're mindful of being judicious when it comes to creative content as well as media context. Because ads need to have both great creative as well as be in the right environment in order for them to be impactful. You can't have one or the other. You really need both. And if you don't get that context right, people either skip or pay for ad-free environments, or they will use an ad blocking technology. Contextual inappropriateness was one of the top 4 reasons why people purchase an ad blocking technology. And you might say to yourself, well, I'll just have my ads within a non-skippable format. If that ad is not relevant to that person in that context, they just won't look, so it won't matter. So when we think about creative quality, it's one of the single largest drivers in terms of growing brand exposure. So which poses the question, are we really investing the right amount of time as well as budgets to make sure that we're creating strong creative? Instead, we know that there is a ton of companies out there that instead is focusing on these complex media optimizations, when really all we need to do to increase those media dollars is make sure that we have the strongest creative out there. And if we take a look at this chart itself, you can see that media synergies is about 10%. So if we have that consistency across touch points and then look at that creative quality, it accounts for about 60% of creative effectiveness. And this is important because if we improve our ads quality, even from that average to best, what we see is there's about a 30% increase in ROI. So it's really important that we make sure that we're putting the best creatives out there. However, what we're seeing is that advertisers are still less confident that they're tailoring content across contexts. And this could be due to actually a fall in testing volumes that we've seen since last year. However, we know that budget is definitely one of the top reasons that people are saying that they're not testing, though when we're putting untested creatives out there, we're basically wasting media dollars. And as we saw on the last slide, if we're just able to increase the creative quality, we can see an increase in ROI. So now comes the fun part of the presentation. So we're going to take a look at what does actually make people pay attention. We know that people pay attention to things when they feel a strong emotional connection. So it's really important when we're creating content to make sure that we're taking those people on an emotional journey. Here at Kantar, we've been working with advertisers and agencies for over 45 years to make sure that we have creative quality to help them grow their brands. And we have validated empirical work that we've seen from both a neuroscience perspective, as well as psychology perspective, to identify what are the 3 elements in ads that help garner attention. The important part to note is that these are not mutually exclusive. So the next couple of slides, we're going to take a look at 3 ads that help entertain, engage, and also take people on a sort of emotive journey. And it's really important, as I said, we need to make sure that people are feeling something in order to have them pay attention, regardless of the placement. So that's one of the things that we want to make sure that you're taking into consideration is, what are people feeling when they're looking at your content? Okay, so the first ad that we're going to take a look at is an ad out of Spain. So it's the Chupa Chups ad. This ad is very distinctive, very entertaining. It has a ton of different elements. So it has this Animoji type graphics. It has extreme close-ups, which you'll see, with tightly knitted music. It also has a TikTok-esque dance. And then it has a lot of visual humor, which works well in the digital environment when sound, it might not necessarily be there. And then finally, it has a look from the 4th wall of a protagonist at the end. So we'll take a look at the first ad right now.
Abre la boca, pon tu lengua a bailar. Nuevo Chupa Chups XXL. Más Chupa Chups, más chicle, más fan.
So very distinctive ad, captures your attention. The next ad that we'll look at is actually from Australia. So this is a KitchenAid ad. And this ad is really making sure that the product is at the center. And it is showcasing that functionality in a very close-up, quirky way, but also entertaining, exactly when home cooking was becoming even larger during the pandemic. And our last and final ad is actually the winner in the TV category. However, this ad launched across a multitude of different platforms. So it launched on TV, digital, outdoor, as well as social platforms. And the thing about this is it takes you through the brand's evolution from a product retailer to a project partner. And we felt that this ad very empathetically and powerfully really displayed the message of a well-known brand, making sure that it's sort of going through its evolution of becoming a trusted partner with consumers to make sure not only will they do the job, but they'll get it done well.
Got a level?
No.
Need a drill?
Yes.
Huh, let's get a trolley. Yeah, let's get one of these. No.
Here you go.
He's good, man. He's good.
Oh, thanks for that.
All right. Okay, yeah.
So good.
So it's finished then.
So I've watched these ads quite a bit, and that one always kind of gets me at the end. So, all of those elements are definitely things that we need to make sure that we have within ads to catch, to gather people's attention. But it really boils down to this, right? You need to make sure that we're gathering attention, or else it's all for naught. So when we think about attention, it's really one of those things currently that is huge within the media industry. That attention is becoming one of those things that everyone is talking about. However, what we also see is that marketers see it as an important influence on creative and media effectiveness. However, there's still room to include it within that creative optimization, media planning, and buying processes. So attention's important. However, we don't want to use overly intrusive formats at the expense of consumer preference. Being overzealous and chasing attention can have a negative impact. Instead, we want to make sure that we're gathering people where they are most receptive by choosing the right platform and channel mix. And this is essential because we're seeing in Australia, there's generally less trust and receptiveness to advertising than we're seeing in global markets. And amongst receptive audiences, we see campaigns are 7 times more impactful. So it's really important. The other thing that you can see on this chart is that every year there's more and more content that's out there. So there's more sort of clutter. So we really need to make sure that we're breaking through and catching people's attention. So if we take a look, this slide is all from Australia. So if we take a look at the the most trusted platforms in Australia, what we see is that they run better quality, more relevant, and less repetitive or intrusive advertising. When you take a look at Twitch and Optus Sport, what we see here is that there's better quality as well as more trustworthy advertising. And for Pinterest, it really comes down to fun and entertaining and relevant ads. Now, if we look at a very sort of local streaming service, what we see is Caillou's coming in around 9 overall or 6 within just digital brands itself. However, it still has those hallmarks as we saw with the top 3 platforms. You see that better quality and more relevant advertising. So it remains key to make sure that we're putting both thought into channel and platform. Platforms offer different personalities and context, so you need to make sure that we're complementing that with both the creative as well as the brand. So, in conclusion, to wrap things up, every digital second counts. I know we've heard this time and again, but it is really true. We want to make sure that we have entertaining, engaging, and emotive content, but to help retain that attention. However, attention's just a stepping stone. We need to make sure that we're placing ads where people are going to be most receptive and on those platforms where they're most trusted to make sure that we are sort of decreasing that repetitiveness as well as intrusive advertising. And it was mentioned earlier, but the test and learn, is absolutely, make sure there's a test and learn framework so then that way you're putting your most, valuable creatives at the forefront. So thanks everyone for your attention. I know we'll have some questions, but if there's any questions about any of the learnings within the deck itself, it does come from our global media reactions. We're more than happy to share that.
JJ, have we got any Slido questions?
Well, Nicole, how do you define or measure creative quality scores?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Creative quality is one of those things that is measured differently depending on who you're talking to, from either a publisher standpoint, an advertiser, an agency. It is all sort of really different. So the data that I had presented in the slide itself was coming from our cross-media database. So for that, we were really looking at each of the different components that we saw drove different metrics in terms of brand exposure or sort of that salience.
So what's your favorite ad of all time?
Oh, that's tough. I hate to say I'm one of those people that don't have favorites. It is true. Yeah, nothing sort of.
I still love the subservient chicken ad. Remember that? I can't
We're old, JJ.
You typed in a demand and then pre-recorded it, so this guy in a chicken suit would then perform the role, and meanwhile the brand was behind it. There's one more question. Hang on. Given not all placements have sound on guarantee, is there any data you can share on the impact of sound and music on creative effectiveness?
So I don't have that data now, though we do have some of that data, so more than happy to share it at a later time.
Thank you. That's it from Slido.
One from me, Nicole.
Yeah.
So the Australian competitive nature of me, having all of our sort of things slightly under, is that consistent over time, or has that been a new one during this study? Have you looked at that data? Is it?
So we haven't looked at it over time, at least I haven't pulled it for this, though we do have the results from last year. So media reactions is sort of a new and improved survey. So in the past, we had something called ad reactions, which didn't necessarily look at both marketers and consumers. So we can look at that data from last year
Yeah, it'd be
and
interesting
answer
to
that.
see
Yeah.
if there's something odd about us or the time, possibly both.
I can say, looking at other global markets, there are, definitely differences, and you're not necessarily seeing some markets, do well on every metric. They'll do well on some, though I'd say, in the most part, we're not seeing sort of everyone doing better from a global perspective.
Any other questions from the floor? Thank you, Nicole.
Perfect. Thanks, you, everyone.